LCSC students of medieval history, Professor Eric Martin here, and welcome to week 6. So, thought I'd do a little bit of a setup here. I think things are mostly self explanatory by this point, but you know, you never really know. So let's get in here and see what we're doing this week in just a few moments. Hopefully, you'll have a video here. Um, I don't have a bunch of additional sources or additional videos this week. They are available. There's actually several quite good ones in the Worlds of History book if you want to take a look at that and use it on your own. And as long as we're talking about it, that is actually material you should be thinking about using for your formal essays. It's a real easy spot to find additional resources. And maybe I should think about that. You ever be in the middle of doing something and have a bit of an epiphany? That seems like a really good set of sources for you guys to be using for your formal essays, as well as a few outside sources. Let me get back to you on that. However, let's go with things here. Um, the Just got a little, notice here. March 4th, so that's 2 weeks from now. You're going to have a updated and revised bibliography, depending on the condition of your previous annotated bibliography. This might be a big change. This might be not so big of a change. But the deal is, we just need to continue to think about these topics so that, because the name of the game on this project is going to be proper book selection. Recon your books, get a sense about what's out there, get a sense about what's in it before you commit to it, and then the reading of it will be more fun, the writing about it will be more fun. Research, book analysis. This is the book analysis on your first book from, on your own project. It's due March 6th. That it means that you should have it read and have written an analysis on it on March 6th. We probably should talk about that book soon, just to make sure that we're both on the same page, that that's a reasonable book. I have these up here as reminders that these are things coming up. This week, what we've got going on are the next two sections from the year 1000. And we're just going to do this the way we did it. I think it was week 3. We're going to split it up. If your last name begins with the letters A through K, you're going to take care of chapter 6 for us. You're going to cover it in detail. If your last name covers L through Z, same thing with chapter 7. This isn't going to be anything new to you guys. I've just divvied it up based on that book review analysis. Easy enough. And that's for both of them. If your last name begins with A through K for chapter 6, you are required to participate. The rest of you, you can, and it will be noted. All right, so I just want to emphasize that. And maybe what I'll do for just a second, depending on what I can get going here, is just give you guys a couple of highlights to be thinking about in terms of how these chapters are going to go, right? So, the Hansen book has really started us off taking a look at the year 1000 and making this argument that the year 1000 is a fundamental year for getting a sense about contemporary globalization and a lot of the processes getting set into motion that we still deal with. A lot of the structures getting set into motion that we still deal with. So that is one of the reasons that we're organizing this whole class around this book, so that we can get a sense about what's going on in the world in these different places about the same time, and then you guys can think about different projects to add into that. right? You don't all have to do the Vikings. You can. I realize it was the first chapter and that stuff's cool, but there's other cool stuff in there as well. And you can keep going. And give me 1 second to pause this and grab this book, which we haven't talked about a whole lot, because it seems to me that we've been busy with the Hansen book. But this was free from the library. Anything post the year 500 is fair game. And that's going to be almost everything from chapter 7 and beyond in this book is going to be covering the medieval period. So there's cool primary sources, there's cool secondary sources. You guys should use this book and dig through it a little bit and see what you find. There's some material in here that connects with all this. All right, back to what I was getting at. Year 1000, that's chapter 1, how she sets it up. And then you guys did a good job going through the material on the Vikings. I'm not going to rehash that, but her looking at Viking connections roughly year 1000, particularly going across the Atlantic. Then, as long as we're across the Atlantic, let's look at the Pan-American highways and let's see what's going on in Mesoamerica, and let's see what's going on with the Inca, and let's see at those kind of connections in the Americas that sometimes we don't think about the way we should, right? And then she goes back to the stuff with the Vikings in chapter 4, but this time it's Vikings going throughout Europe and getting really involved in that European slave trade, right? And thinking about the role of slaves in particular in the medieval economy, which seems to be a fairly large factor in terms of like themes in the book. If I was looking for a theme in the book, this seems to be something that she brings up quite a bit. So you don't necessarily have to do your final projects for this course on something like the Maya or ancient Mali. You could do something on different forms of medieval slavery, the roles of a slave system in the medieval period. Something to think about. But anyway, chapter 5 gets into looking at ancient Mali and the world's richest man, and in the process looking through North Africa, looking through the world of Islam, looking at sort of how all those connections get set up, right? Okay, and that gets us to chapter 6 and chapter 7. I'm going to be fairly quick about this, but I do want to give you a few things to be on the lookout for. In this particular chapter, chapter 6, Central Asia splits in two. Really, she's getting at this idea that about the year 1000, you've got major world religions expanding into new areas. And in a lot of ways, that's what we got here. We got Christianity moving into Eastern and Northern Europe, and we got Islam moving into Western Africa and Central Asia. And then one of the ways that she says this stuff is spread is through these Central Asian, warrior cultures that are going all across Eurasia, leading up to about the year 1000. And in the process of talking about this, she talks about trade goods. She talks about, trades in textiles and furs and gems and amber. She talks about trade in knowledge and science and calendars and math, religion. She talks about horses, right? And the sale of Central Asian slaves. Talks about slave armies. Talks about some of the other implications of this kind of stuff, connected to disease. The chapter goes through a number of Islamic and Buddhist dynasties. Don't get too caught up in that stuff. be aware of it. If it sounds interesting, come back to it. All right, you don't have to memorize all that stuff. Just kind of be aware that there's a number of big, powerful states, operating during the time period. Get a sense about what, excuse me, get a sense about what kind of makes that happen, right? And then the military slaves. That's an interesting, well, to me personally, that seems like an interesting topic, looking at how unskilled slaves go into military training and how those military slaves wind up, gaining, positions in government and how that works out. So again, revisiting this issue of slaves, but it's maybe not the way you expect to see it. And then as we get later into the chapter, she really starts to focus on the Mongols. First largest contiguous land empire in history, the role of horse culture. Good material on the Mongols in here. Really focus on sort of Mongol flexibility, in the sense that they don't really push their religion on other cultures. They actually kind of adopt where they go their religions. And then the different kinds of, metal workers and weavers and all that kind of stuff. And then how the Mongols are able to or not able to operate their government. I realize that was a bit of a, quick, rapid fire. But those are a few things to be on the lookout for when we're looking at the Central Asian, splitting up into, and how some of the different religions and trade items and things are moving around Central Eurasia. And that's really what Chapter 6 is about. You guys will cover it in more detail in the discussion boards. Okay, same thing for Chapter 7. Laid out, as surprising journeys, in part because, wow, some of these journeys don't even seem possible. And others we don't really think of, thinking particularly of Malay, Polynesian voyages, and, how do people get to Madagascar? And, when you look linguistically, right, Madagascar, language in Madagascar is not related to languages in the rest of Africa. So that's kind of an interesting thing. What happens there? And this is her, in part telling that story about how we try to figure that out. How do we figure out issues with Polynesian boats and Polynesian navigation techniques? Talks a bit about going to Rapa Nui, to Easter Island. That kind of stuff is towards the end of this book, right? So you can get some additional materials on that if you want to do that. And really looking at the potential for environmental crises. And she brings that up in several chapters, right? Looking at different kind of environmental factors that maybe cause people to need to move around. And I think that's an important part of her work, that when we're looking for different kinds of themes, and I don't remember really seeing a whole lot about that in the discussion boards previously. Wind patterns, navigation techniques, all that stuff is discussed in this chapter in terms of how Polynesian travelers are moving around the islands, moving across the ocean. She gets into discussing the importance of India in Cambodia and Thailand and Vietnam, and sort of their, it's not necessarily a regional influence, it's bigger than regional, but regional influence, right? And thinking about how Hindu deities such as Shiva and Vishnu make it around, or the various political units So there's a lot of stuff in this particular chapter about the movement of Buddhism and Hinduism. I think that stuff's really cool, particularly as Buddhists and Hindus really get involved in aromatic trades, right? It's like you wonder why, all this like incense and fragrant woods and stuff is like valuable. And then it's like, oh, this is something that people are using, at least in part, right? Religious wise. Other issues to it as well. But that to me was kind of an eye opener how much of that trade was focused on that. And then she talks a little bit about the Chinese trade, right? Looking at iron goods and silver, Chinese ceramics, and how they make it, all across, the Indian Ocean area. Writing systems, and then how different leaders convert to different religions and the development of these temple states, which is not something that we are necessarily very familiar about if you've done most of your education, here in the U.S. And really one of the things I think she's trying to point out is that, you can compare this to the chapter on Central and North America and South America. It's like, we don't really think about North America as being involved in a globalization process before Europeans get there, but they are. They're connecting. And then, when the Vikings and later the Spanish show up in North America, okay, now there's these things that are connected, but in North America there had been these connections developing already. And she's making this argument that, hey, in Southeast Asia, it's the same thing. They've already started all this before the links started to overlap, if that makes sense. Because roughly, around the year 1000 or so, the entire Southeast Asian region is sort of oriented, right, towards China, who is also, that's the, big player in the region. So that just gives you a few things to be on the lookout for as you go through these particular chapters. I'd really like to see, I don't want to make our discussion boards overwhelming, okay? But really, I would like to see enough action and enough detail on the discussion boards to make me feel all right about having not assigned a formal essay over this book, right? Because I'm just trying to streamline our work as much as we can. And so if we go back to what we've done up to this point, right, and you just go back and look at some of your feedback where I'm saying, I'd like to see a few more details. Another post, another couple of posts, let's flesh this stuff out, and then we'll be able to use it as the backbone for our formal essays later. And then we'll also be able to, like, in good faith, all right, we're knocking formal writing out on the discussion boards, so we don't need to have as many assignments that have a more formalized grade. All right, that's all I got. If you have any questions, drop by my office hours, send me an email, all that kind of good stuff. Otherwise, enjoy your historical studies.